All right, so let's get started. Good morning, everyone. Before we begin, I would like to thank Ms. Ada Ramirez for providing Spanish translation for today's session. There is no default language, so everyone needs to please click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen and select either English or Spanish. Buenos días y bienvenidos. Por favor, todos deben hacer clic en el icono de interpretación en la parte inferior de su pantalla y seleccionar inglés o español. Gracias. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Samantha Wiley, and I am the Convention Coordinator for the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles. Welcome to the next workshop in our virtual ministry fair, Servants of the Spirit, Gifts for Ministry. This is the first of a two-part training for treasurers workshop with the Reverend Michele Racusin, CFO of the Diocese of California. Up until recently, she was actually CFO of the Diocese of Los Angeles. She's easily one of my favorite people, and you guys are lucky to have her. This session is being recorded. It's not being live streamed since that wasn't cooperating with me, but I'll post that later. It will be available on the Facebook and YouTube channel of the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles, and the recording will remain available for viewing on demand. A link to that video, along with the resources presented, will also be available on the EDLA Convention website at www.diocesanconvention.com. At this time, I ask everyone to mute yourselves. Your questions and comments are more than welcome. Just please put them in the chat, and we will pause between topics during the presentation and answer your questions in the order received. And now I turn it to you, Reverend Michele.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, EDLA, for taking on the webinar hosting. We're very appreciative of that. We are looking forward to future joint webinars. And so if you have an idea for something that you would like to see for a webinar, just put it in chat, and we will retrieve those items later. Some of the things that we're thinking of offering would be things on how to invest your money, how to read a financial statement, making your housing allowance at the end of the year, and others. This is part of a two-part series. Today, we'll talk about the role of the treasurer, and on March 10th, we will be continuing this with April 10th at 9 o'clock, and we'll talk about internal controls, fraud, discretionary funds, and what an accountable plan is. So mark your calendars for that as well. But let's open with prayer. Let us pray. Good and gracious God, you call us each to different work in your church, and you give us the gifts to equip us for this work. I pray especially for those you've called into the ministry of treasurer. Keep your call fresh in our hearts, renew and refresh our spirits for the work ahead. Teach us to seek your guidance, wisdom, and strength as we fulfill this call. And this we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So with that, let me start with the slide presentation. This will be available on the EDLA website. It will also be available on the website for DioCal. Can you see the screen? Are the slides up? Okay, good. For some reason, they didn't come up on my side. All right, so today we're going to talk about the actual role and responsibility of the treasurer. So very quickly, put in the chat, what exactly does a treasurer do? What do you envision that a treasurer does in your diocese? Okay, so let's look at some of the common treasurer responsibilities. And I hope these slides are advancing because my screen is taking on a life of its own. So some of these common responsibilities include overseeing the counting and the deposits. And this obviously is for mostly for in-person worship. A little bit different now during the pandemic, but we still want all of the gifts that are received to be counted by two people. Okay, and we're going to go over that a little bit later about the details of that. But that's one of the key responsibilities. Treasurers need to ensure that the bills are paid, and oftentimes have the responsibility of being one of the two check signers. And that's of course for churches that still have paper checks. other rules and controls apply to electronic checks and ACH transfers. Also, to facilitate the timely completion and submission of the annual audit and the parochial reports, churches are required to be audited on an annual basis. And parochial reports, if you haven't gotten yours in yet, they need to be in now. That's a report that talks about the life and health of the parish, and those are due electronically in March 1st for some dioceses, and for others, April 1st. Also responsible for reconciling all the financial accounts on the books and records. They're responsible for reporting the financial condition to the bishop or the vestry or the bishop's committee. Now, I can't tell you how many churches I've been in where I've attended a vestry meeting or a bishop's committee meeting, and the treasurer says, "Hey, we have X amount of money in the bank account. It's not sufficient. Don't spend any money." That is not a financial report. Okay, and we're going to go over a little bit about what a financial report looks like. The treasurer needs to make sure that the canons with respect to financial matters are followed. So we have canons both at the Episcopal Church level, and you can easily Google those and find a link for those and follow the financial ones. Dioceses also have their own canons, and these explain some of the due dates and some of the responsibilities for those dioceses. So make sure that you're aware of both of these sets of records, these rules, and make sure that you follow them. Also, some treasurers present the budget at the annual parish meeting. Sounds like a lot of work. So you're all ready to rock and roll, right? Rest assured, please know that you're not alone in this endeavor. You have behind you the support of your church, your priest, your vestry, your bishop's committee, and the diocese. So let's go in and see what a treasurer is, who a treasurer is. So the role of the treasurer really is one of independence. A treasurer cannot be a member of the vestry, although the treasurer attends vestry meetings. The treasurer cannot be a person in a role of influence or control related to the financial statements, because the treasurer is reporting about the financial statements. And the treasurer shouldn't be related to anyone in a position of control. So that would mean that the treasurer should not be involved in a relationship with the parish priest leadership or vestry members or bishop's committee members. And the treasurer doesn't vote at finance committee meetings or vestry meetings. So the primary function of a treasurer is to ensure the integrity of the financial statements, to review and the reconciliations of the financial statements on a monthly basis, and to provide oversight of the financial records, but all from an independent perspective. So let's drill down and see what that looks like. When we're talking about ensuring the integrity of the financial statements, first of all, we need to understand how to read the financial statements. So churches, as other nonprofit institutions, use fund accounting. And how that differs from the accounting that you're used to seeing on corporate books and records is that each fund, each type of ministry is accounted for separately, and then it is all put together on one financial statement. So for example, the main fund on the church books and records would be the operating fund. And it's from the operating fund that salaries are paid, the gardener is paid, et cetera. Other funds may be like an altar guild fund or a building fund. And all of these funds keep their accounting somewhat separately. And then they're all combined in one statement. If this is something that's new to you, that's perfectly normal. We will offer another webinar on how to read a financial statement if you'd like a refresh on that. Within fund accounting, there are different designated funds. So there are some people, they'll write a check for the operations of the the church, and that would go into the operating fund. But some donors put restrictions on funds. So for example, a donor may write a check and say, this is for the new organ, or this is to fund an organ repair, or this is for our labyrinth project. And when a donor makes a restricted donation, those funds cannot be used for other purposes. So they have to be put into a special fund. So somebody writing a check for the labyrinth fund, it's going to go in the labyrinth fund. It can't be used to pay your electric bill. It can't be used to pay pay salaries. Ones without donor restrictions are the ones typically that people just write a check to the church and you use it for salaries and electric bills. Those are ones that go into the operating fund. Some funds are board designated. So the board would say, we are going to set aside this amount of money and we are going to say that it is for X project. But the board can change its mind. So that would be your vestry bishops committee. And during a meeting, they can vote and record in the minutes what these specific funds are being used for. And then there's another category, and that's one of endowments. And we're going to talk about this in more detail in our investment webinar. But the one for endowments, an endowment is when somebody gives money, and this typically happens through the estate process. So this is typically money that's willed to the church, but not always. But it is set aside, and the capital, the principal, isn't touched. The church spends the revenue, the interest, the dividends. And so the corpus of this fund is kept in perpetuity. We only are able to spend the income that comes off of that. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more in another seminar, but these are kind of like the nuts and bolts of these fund designations. Now, there's also a difference in how you keep your books. There is a cash basis system and there's an accrual based system. For parishes and congregations, I am a big proponent of using the cash basis. The accrual basis is a lot more complicated and it's difficult to change treasures and have people understand as these books and records transition to different leadership groups. Cash basis is basically you receive a bill, you pay it, and that's when you record it. You have a promise from a parishioner to pay a pledge, but you record that pledge as you actually receive it. The reason I think this is really important for churches is because people can see it and know that the cash that's on that balance sheet, the cash that's in that P&L statement is actually real and live. It's been received. It's been paid. The accrual basis says that as I receive a bill, it becomes an expense even before I pay it. As I'm promised a pledge, it becomes income even before I receive it. So you can see how if it's going to make a very big difference on how the financial statements look at the end of the day. So that's cash versus accrual. In fund accounting, there are two main financial statements. One is the statement of financial position. If you come from the corporate world, you'll be used to hearing balance sheet. And that's the one that lists your cash, what remains in the different fund accounts. So how much money you have and assets you have in the operating account, for example. The statement of activities is your profit and loss statement. So now that we kind of have an idea of what the financial statement looks like, how to read it, let's look at how cash contributions are recorded. So we basically get cash contributions in the form of pledges, people who have promised to pay for, the church throughout the year. We have amounts that are put into the plate, and these are ones that are just like a check, but the person hasn't made a promise to pay. They haven't pledged to pay. This often happens from visitors. Plate also includes cash contributions. Then there are ones that are designated. So the Vestry of Bishops Committee may want to have a gift acceptance policy. And why is this? Well, because someone may put a gift in the offering plate, for example, or mail a gift in and say, you know what, here is $5,000, but I want you to use this specifically for red spinners for the rector's car, because I think this is a really good way to call attention to the church. But the rector and the vestry may have a different strategy for calling attention to the church. So if you have a gift acceptance policy, it's a guideline that lets people know what gifts are desirable and which ones are not. Keep in mind also that the IRS has a hand in some of the things that we do. So if you receive a single gift of $250 or more, you are required to provide a written acknowledgement of that gift. And that written acknowledgement needs to have a couple pieces of information on it. It needs to have the name of your church on it, the date the contribution was made, the amount of the cash contribution, and a very special statement at the bottom that has to include that the gifts or services that the church provided in return for this contribution consist entirely of intangible religious benefits. That is something that's new within the last 10 years or so, a requirement of the IRS. Also note that having your EIN number is not a requirement. Some people think that that's a requirement to prove that it's a nonprofit. It is not. Basic, it's just super basic. Name of church, date of contribution, amount of cash contribution, and the disclosure statement at the bottom. So that's for cash contributions. Let's look and see what happens when you receive a non-cash contribution. So a non-cash contribution would be one like household gifts. So you're going to have a rummage sale and people are donating their children's outgrown clothes. It can also mean a piece of real estate, or it can mean a vehicle, and it can also mean stock. So these are all things that aren't cash, they're not liquid. Again, you're going to want to have a gift acceptance policy, because if someone donates a piece of real estate that's landlocked in the desert, it may cost you more to maintain that property than, and it may not even be sellable. So you'll want to have a gift acceptance policy. And the donor acknowledgement on this includes the description of the gift, but never the value. So you are not an appraiser. It's the donor's obligation to come to a reasonable estimate of the value of this gift. So I get questions oftentimes about how to value dinner tickets. How do you have, if you're going to have a special dinner to raise money, what do you do with that? And how do you designate part of that as a charitable contribution so people can write the gift off on their taxes? Well, oftentimes people think that if they have a ticket that says the contribution is $100 for the dinner, that means that the $100 is tax deductible, and that's not the case. What you're required to do when you have a dinner ticket, when you're having a special a fundraiser event, is to provide a good faith estimate of the value of the meal that's being provided. And that's typically printed on the bottom of the ticket. That's the easiest way. So for example, if you have a benefit that you say the tickets are $100 each, but you're serving spaghetti, the fair market value of that may be $5 a plate, right? And so you want to include that that's the good faith estimate, because that will let people know that together with their accountant, when they prepare their taxes, that the balance, that $95, it may qualify as a charitable contribution. So that's what you'll want to do, a good faith estimate. It's easiest to print that at the bottom of the ticket. Now, conversely, if you have a raffle, those tickets are never tax deductible. So when you are preparing your special fundraiser dinner, do not ever make that ticket a raffle ticket as well. Because if you do that, none of the charitable there is no charitable contribution there. So these are some of the common things that come up. So just keep those two things in mind. The other very common non-cash gift that a church receives is a donation of stock. And this is fraught with misunderstandings. Because a church is not an appraiser, please do not ever give them a receipt that lists the value of their stock. Instead, give them a receipt that acknowledges the date of the gift, that gives them the donor's name, that it says the number of shares that were given and the name of the company. The donor will then take this information and work with their CPA or themselves if they're doing their own return, and come up with the value of the stock. Okay, and again, if you get pushback on this, flip me an email and I will give this to you in writing. This is super important, and donors always want you to tell them, well, how much did you sell it for? That's fine, but it can't be part of that gift acknowledgement. So I want to pause real quickly and ask if we have questions up to this point. And Samantha, I'm going to need your help because my screen is not showing any chats.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So first off, we got some really great comments in the beginning. You asked what people see a treasurer as. I feel like the CFO of the parish. I manage the financial system of the parish, monthly financial reports to the vestry, oversee the office, create and monitor budgets. Treasurer has fiduciary responsibility to manage funds and distribute to those in need. Report the financial position and ensure proper accounting. Make sure good use of the church's resources are done and keeping correct financial reports. So lots of good comments there. So we do have a few questions already, so we'll just go ahead and get through those in order that they were received. First, do all checks have to have two signatures? That is, could there be a threshold where there is only one signature?
Absolutely. So in a very good practice is that checks less than $500 may require just one signature. Checks in excess of $500, two signatures. But this needs to be a policy within your institution. So make sure that policy is one that's in writing. Now, keep in mind also that as things have changed and we've become more electronic, many parishes don't use, or many institutions don't use paper checks anymore. So if you are using bank checks, then you'll need to have a system where the expenditure, the disbursement is approved by either one or two people in advance of that check hitting the bank account, being written through the bank account. The same would apply for ACH transfers.
Okay. Next question, could altar guild / flower expenses run through the operating fund as weekly costs?
Absolutely, and that's an easier way to do it. In fact, when I was a rector, I did not have a separate altar guild fund because we did that. We budgeted as a line item, flowers, wine, communion wafers, et cetera, and we ran everything through operations. So absolutely. In fact, the fewer designated accounts you have, the easier accounting will be. You just have to be respectful of the donor's wishes.
All right. Who decides to establish a new fund?
That would be the work of the vestry or bishop's committee.
Is there a model / template of gift acceptance policy from the diocese?
I do not know the answer to that. If you have a question about that, shoot an email to either me, if you're from DioCal, or finance at
ladiocese.org.
ladiocese.org. Sorry, I'm already
That's
stumbling
okay.
over that one if you're in Los Angeles.
Someone notes that DioCal's model bylaws indicate the treasurer does not have to be on the vestry, but certainly can be. So the level of independence varies in our parishes.
Yeah, actually, I thank you for calling that to my attention. I'm going to look at that because really the treasurer should not be a vestry member. However, the treasurer should attend the vestry meetings.
Okay. Someone else comments, might want to advise donors to use a donor designated fund to give stock via the fund, i.e. you fund the fund with the stock and then provide a cash gift via the donor designated fund. Most major brokerages offer this, Fidelity, Charles Schwab, etc.
Yeah, those are becoming more and more popular. They're a great vehicle for making charitable donations, and that's something that we will talk about in more detail during the investment webinar. But thank you for that. That's very good.
Do you have any suggestions for congregations that may not have anyone willing or able to fulfill the role and responsibilities of treasurer?
Yeah, well, you do need a treasurer. So that's just something that that every institution needs to cultivate and recruit a good person to be treasurer.
Okay. If you run the AG funds through operating, don't you have to ensure that you're spending at least that amount in the current year? Otherwise, how do you know the balance unspent from year to year?
Well, if you have funds that are specifically designated as alter guild funds, then they need to be in an alter guild fund, separately. But the easiest way to work with those types of funds is to just have it as a budgeted line item on your operations, and just run those expenses as part of the cost of doing business as a church. Does that make sense?
I think so. If you have
Okay.
a follow-up question to that, go ahead. Um, should the treasurer attend every meeting and all of it, or can the treasurer attend quarterly?
No, the treasurer needs to report to the vestry or bishops committee the state of the financial position of the parish or mission on a monthly basis. This is crucial, absolutely crucial.
Someone comments, our treasurer has always been in the vestry or bishops committee. It's even in our bylaws. How serious is that?
I'm surprised to hear that. I think I'm gonna look into some of that when I return. But I mean, it is a good practice not to have not to have the treasurer be a vestry member, because the vestry is the body that makes decisions about how to spend the money. While the treasurer can have an opinion about that, they can have a voice about that, they shouldn't have a vote about that. They need to be an independent reporting entity.
Okay. When the church receives a gift from a donor advised fund or foundation, can it be considered a fulfillment of a pledge?
Absolutely.
All right.
I mean,
Does
it's up to the donor, right? Because the donor may say that here's in addition to my pledge, but it certainly can be part of fulfilling the pledge.
okay. Does EDLA have recommendations for financial and accounting software packages for small parishes?
Well, there are various financial software packages available. Probably the most common one for small institutions would be QuickBooks. QuickBooks is not my go-to financial package because it doesn't leave behind a good audit trail. And I can't remember the statistic, but it was pretty overwhelming that when there was a fraud in an institution, that like 90 something percent of the time they were using QuickBooks, and it's just because there's no audit trail. A really good software package is Church Windows. It's a little bit more expensive, and it's not as user-friendly. It's not as intuitive as QuickBooks, but it is a much, much better piece of software. And so I would certainly advise using that, or consider using that one.
All right. Um, please say more about how to fill the need for a treasurer. How do you cultivate a treasurer when sometimes you don't even have literate folks in your congregation?
Yeah. So when you're looking for a treasurer, you want someone who, I mean, ideally who has a financial background, right? And somebody who's detail oriented, and I it's just a matter of working with your congregation. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what else to say. I know that that's the smaller your group, the more difficult it is. But and pray for the gift of a treasurer.
Would you say maybe that it would be appropriate to reach out to your diocesan office or the diocesan finance office to get specific guidance for your parish or mission?
With respect to recruiting a treasurer.
Yeah, if you're really having trouble at your parish or mission getting these roles filled, maybe it would be good to reach out to your diocese to see if you can get any guidance.
Sure. I mean, the diocese has wonderful resources, so that might be a good avenue.
Okay. I use a donor advised fund, and that is how I pay my pledge. Needs to be considered a non-binding pledge as far as IRS is concerned, i.e., not a contract.
Well, I think that you use the donor advised fund, the money comes in, and then there's an understanding that it's fulfilling your pledge. In either way, it's going to your account, right? And you're getting credit for having made that contribution against the amount that you promised.
Okay. Michelle, can't you have an altar guild fund on the balance sheet that may have more money in it than are needed in any year? I'm thinking specifically about the altar guild receiving legacy gifts for them to buy special items, which may not happen in the same year.
Oh, sure. Because see, that fund carries over every year. It's a continuation. So whatever hasn't been spent in one year carries over to the next. It's kind of like its own siloed fund.
Okay. Does the treasurer need to be a member of the parish?
No,
Okay, this is the same person who is asking about cultivating finding a treasurer
right.
when they
I,
might
I
not have that resource available in their congregation.
I have never heard of a requirement that the treasurer be a member of the congregation.
Okay,
I don't think it's a requirement.
okay. Um, is there a mentor program?
This is it. No, not that I'm aware of. But certainly, within each institution, there are people who have done this before. There are people with the gifts, to do the work. And then, if you have questions, just reach out to your CFO or finance office at the diocesan level.
Yeah, and as a reminder, that's Michelle R. at diocal.org or finance at ladiocese.org. And the Episcopal Church also has the manual for business affairs, which is available in English or Spanish. And I'll post that link again. Next comment, we have a very literate parish, but it's small and we're having a very hard time getting anyone to take on the job of treasurer because it seems like a large job for a volunteer. We've considered hiring someone at a CPA office to help out. Is that okay?
Sure. But remember that you're going to need a reporting at every bishops committee or vestry meeting. So that needs to be part of that understanding.
Okay. Could EDLA train volunteers on a personal basis to get ready to serve as treasurer? Yeah, again, this is it. Contact your diocesan finance office with further questions.
Yeah.
Last question, and then I'm gonna say we should move on. What we have done to get around the donor advised fund restriction against pledges is to call the pledges intentions to give. DAFs are okay with that.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, you're going to get the gift and you're going to put it into the account, for lack of a better word, of the donor, so that they understand how much they've paid during the year.
Okay.
I understand where you're coming from, with respect to it being a contract. So,
Okay. All right, so that's all the questions for now. Let's continue. If you got more questions and comments, please put them in the chat and we'll read them out at the next pause.
okay. So let's move on. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I got out of order. Never mind. Okay. Let's go here. One of the main jobs of a treasurer is to review and reconcile the financial statements monthly. And so this would be all of the accounts on the books. You want to look at the investment, the bank accounts, the loans, et cetera. These statements need to go to the church office. Please do not have these statements sent to anybody offsite. So in other words, if the treasurer, it doesn't go to the treasurer's home. The bank accounts for ECW, for example, don't go to the president of ECW's home. All of these statements need to go to the church office. And this is a really important matter of internal controls. The treasurer is the one that either reconciles the accounts or reviews the reconciliation. And so when the treasurer's looking at this, so for example, say like you have a mortgage on your church property, the treasurer will want to make sure that those payments are being made timely, so on a monthly basis usually, and that the split between the interest and the principal is accurate on the financial statements. I mean, oftentimes, it has happened in the past where the whole payment was recorded against the loan principal, and there was no interest broken out, and then it doesn't tell you what your actual balance is on that loan. So that's an important thing to look at. And as the treasurer's reviewing the financial statements, they're going to want to make sure the salaries were paid, that the payroll taxes are being paid timely, that retirement's being paid, and that the amount of unpaid bills isn't climbing. It's not getting out of control. And if the institution is finding itself in a cash weak position, that needs to be reported to the vestry. So in other words, if the bills are piling up and you don't have the cash to pay them, the vestry needs to know immediately so that action can be taken. Because remember that the treasurer's not the one that's going to make the decision about what that action is. They are the independent reporter of what's happening. The treasurer should also approve new vendors. And the reason for this is that it's a good internal control that so that another set of eyes sees the company, for lack of a better word, that's going to be receiving the checks for goods and services. This prevents an unscrupulous person from writing a check to their brother-in-law, for example. So all of these new vendors are approved before checks are written to them. They'll also review the disbursement activity. So look through the check register, look through your printout from the financial statement about who's been paid. That will also help you to know whether your electric bill is being paid. The treasurer may be a check signer. There should be 2 check signers on checks generally $500 or more, but it's not a requirement, but certainly you may find yourself in that position. And these, the check signing records need to be kept current. So when there's a change every year in senior warden, for example, in treasurer, you want to make sure that those records are kept updated at the bank. And then reviewing the financial statements. And so we've gone over that a bit. Another important role of the treasurer is to provide oversight of the financial statements. And so part of that is to make sure that your institution has internal controls and that those internal controls are being followed. We'll go over that in more detail during our April 10th at 9 o'clock meeting. The treasurer is going to oversee the accounting and the deposit of the contributions. So when we get back to normal, and after the Sunday collection is made, you'll want to have teams of 2 independent counters. So these teams need to be people that are not related, and so a husband and wife or spouses cannot be the 2 counters, and that these teams are rotated. So Betsy and Tom are not always the team counting on the first Sunday of the month. You'll split Betsy and Tom up, and Betsy will count with Margaret one day. And these people also can't be the ones who are recording the transactions on the books. Also, whenever possible, you'll want a separate person to take that deposit to the bank, and you'll want to be able to do that on a timely basis. Banks offer drop boxes now, so you can drop it on Sunday right after the counting. Also want to make sure that the parochial report is filed timely and that the annual audit is filed timely and submitted. So let's look for a moment at the annual audit. Now, this varies from diocese to diocese, but the main thing to remember is that the canons require that there is an audit every year. In different dioceses have different due dates for that. In LA, it's September 1st. I would imagine that in California, it's probably in around September as well, but I'll need to verify that date. It's done a little bit differently in each diocese. In Los Angeles, that completed audit is sent to the Secretary of Convention. In DioCal, we have an internal audit a person who actually does the audit, and they take care of getting that audit to me. One of the best resources and one of the most important resources that you have at your hands as a treasurer, and you must have this. This is like almost as wonderful as the Bible and the Book of Common Prayer. And that is the Manual of Business Methods in Church Affairs. It's available in English and in Spanish. The link is here on the slide. Samantha has put that up in the chat, and that will be available to you afterwards. But this has really, really important things about how to handle finances, internal controls, insurance, et cetera, and audits within this. And available in English and Spanish. You please make sure that you have access to this and that you read and internalize that. I am going to leave it at that. The well, first of all, are there any questions at this point?
We do have a couple questions.
Okay.
All right, let me just scroll back up here. What about emails from the bank to the treasurer? Should the treasurer use an email set up with the church, or may the treasurer use their personal email account instead?
Yeah, the treasurer can use their personal email account. That would be fine. I mean, it's also wonderful to have a treasurer account set up at the church level, because as the treasurer changes, you've got a continuous email address for the bank. So ideally, that's the best. But but you can have emails go to your personal home. That's fine.
Okay. For check signing, we don't have the treasurer sign checks since they write the checks. Segregation of duties.
Oh, that's perfect. The person who writes them should not sign them. That's excellent.
For capital improvements / leaseholder improvements, e.g. roof repairs, stained glass window restoration, are these subject to diocesan assessment?
The payment for a capital improvement. I am not sure. I don't think so. I have to look at the instructions on the Procure report. I'm sorry, I don't know that off the top of my head. But if that's your question, shoot me an email and I will get you the answer.
Okay.
I have to look at the instructions again. I'm rusty, sorry.
Yeah, and the Procure report just changed, so.
Yeah.
I was surprised that a rector is often a check signer in DioCal upon moving here from Diocese of Massachusetts, where the rector only had signatory power over the discretionary fund.
Yeah, it's having the rector be a check signer is not a best practice. And clearly there are other people in the parish who can sign the checks. I would never, as a rector, be a check signer.
Okay. Should check signers be bonded?
The vestry and treasurer are required to be bonded, and your check signers are probably going to be either a vestry member or treasurer.
Most of these duties are handled by our church administrator, and the treasurer merely reports the results to the board. Is this a problem?
If you don't have good internal controls and segregation of duties, yes, that is a problem. The treasurer is the one who's primarily responsible for reporting. The treasurer does not need to be a check signer. You can have 2 vestry members as check signers, and that's fine. But you don't want to have an administrator reconcile accounts, write checks, and sign checks. That's a no-no.
Okay. Can the parish use remote deposit? I saw a Massachusetts parish use immediate Sunday remote deposit, saving a trip to the bank, but only one person does the deposit.
You can do that, and one person can make that deposit. So in other words, you're running checks through a machine. It's basically what it is, and it's a very efficient thing to do. But that does not negate the internal controls that you have over listing the checks, running a tape, having 2 counters, and you could actually even have another person sit with the person depositing, running the checks through the machine. But as long as you've got that list of all of the components of the deposit, and then the checks are run through the machine, and then you've got another person recording that, you're fine.
Okay. Just to make sure I heard correctly, the counters need to make the deposit, not say the parish administrator after the 2 counters have done that. The counted dollars are put in the safe until the parish administrator goes to the bank.
Okay, first of all, the counters are typically not the ones who make the deposit, okay, because they've already touched the cash. So you want them to count the money, make the tape. That original tape and list gets handed off to the treasurer. A copy goes to your parish administrator so that they can record all the pledges and the receipts in the books and records. You would have a separate person make the deposit. So that's who does what. The timing, it's ideal to have the deposit made by a drop on Sunday. Alternatively, you could have a person make the deposit on Monday morning. You want to do it timely, and you want it to be done by a person who's not making the recording. So if the parish administrator is the one recording all of the components of the deposit in the books, you don't want that parish administrator making the deposit.
Okay. The treasurer should not influence the vestry, but we're the source of most of their information and presumably have more expertise. Can you say more about this relationship?
Sure. So the Vestry of Bishops Committee is the body that has fiduciary responsibility over the finances of the institution, over the finances of the congregation. The treasurer, while the treasurer will have an opinion and a voice at the vestry meetings, at finance committee meetings, at bishop committee meetings, the treasurer's role is to be an independent reporter of the facts. So it's like, just give me the facts, ma'am, kind of thing. Okay.
Okay. A comment regarding the capital improvements. I don't believe they are. I assume they're not taken into consideration for the diocesan assessment. Take a look at the parochial report. The next question, how do you bond the vestry and treasurer?
It's just on your insurance. It's part of your insurance policy.
All right. And that's all the questions for now.
Okay. Let's move on. There's another really kind of odd, unique thing that happens in churches, and that has to do with housing allowances. And I'm not going to spend a great amount of time on this, but you need to be aware that this is a kind of a really different but important component that happens in churches. So what happens with clergy is they have this really kind of unique tax status in under the government. So for purposes of income taxes, for federal and California income taxes, they're going to be taxed as employees, okay? But for Social Security and Medicare tax purposes, they're treated as self-employed. And this is an area that's very confusing because it's so unique. Having said that, a clergy person receives a Form W-2 at the end of the year. Okay, so your rector or vicar is an employee and receives a W-2, not a 1099. The church can withhold taxes for the clergy member, but it's not part of automatic withholding through the tax tables. The cleric will tell you via the W-9 forms how much they want withheld from their check. But you don't run them through the normal payroll system and have FICA withheld and taxes withheld. The cleric is responsible for paying these taxes on their own. The cleric also pays both sides of Social Security. So like a lay employee, your administrator, for example, the church picks up half of their Social Security, and half is deducted through a payroll withholding. But for clergy, they have to pay both sides on their own. So let's look at this housing allowance, because the vestry is involved in this, and as a treasurer, you need to make sure that this is happening and have an understanding of it. So let's just talk about like who is eligible for a housing allowance. And again, I can't see what you're seeing, but does it have the on the bottom? I mean, does it have underneath who, like who qualifies? Or
Yeah.
oh, good. Okay. So who qualifies for a housing allowance? Well, the cleric is the one, a paid ordained person qualifies for the housing allowance. And what the housing allowance allows, what it does is it designates a piece of the cleric's cash salary as housing. And that piece that's designated as housing is not subject to federal and state income tax. It's still subject to both pieces of the Social Security tax, but it's not subject to the income tax. So the person who qualifies for this is a paid ordained person. The person who designates the amount of the housing exclusion is the cleric. This housing allowance comes to the vestry or bishop's committee on an annual basis in a resolution. And that resolution states that the cleric is designating or asking the board, the vestry, to designate X dollars as housing allowance. When the vestry or bishop's committee receives this resolution, it is not their responsibility to worry about the validity of the housing allowance. The vestry or bishop's committee only needs to make sure that the housing allowance is equal to or less than the amount of compensation that you are paying the cleric, and that the person is ordained. Worrying about whether it's a correct housing allowance or not is the responsibility of the clergy. Okay, so when you get this housing allowance, you do not have to worry about, did they add up the electric bills properly, et cetera. That's their responsibility. So who reports the housing allowance to the IRS? It is reported via the W-2 form. There's a special box, and I'll show you a copy of the W-2 form. And are survivors eligible for the exclusion? So in other words, the priest has a housing allowance exclusion. They die. Does the surviving spouse get to continue on with that housing allowance? And the answer is no. The housing allowance dies with the cleric. Let me just show you what it looks like on a W-2. Now, if you're in DioCal, you don't have to worry about this because payroll is handled by the diocesan office, but you should know anyway what this should look like. So here's a W-2 form, and you can see that in box 1, this cleric received $30,000 in cash salary. And in addition to that, in box 14, the cleric received a housing allowance of $20,000. The $20,000 is the amount that was approved by the vestry as housing allowance. The total salary of the cleric is $50,000. So basically you're taking the salary and you're just dicing it into 2 different pieces, housing allowance and cash. Also note on the W-2 that a cleric will not have any amount listed for Medicare tax withheld or Medicare Social Security tax withheld. The church does not withhold this money. It is the cleric's responsibility to pay this. And if you end up with amounts in those boxes because accidentally the payroll company thought that this person was a lay person, you're going to need to amend the W-2 and your quarterly tax returns and reimburse the cleric for the amounts that were withheld. So it gets really ugly. So just make sure that this is set up properly in the beginning. So just so you understand what a housing allowance is comprised of. And again, this isn't something that you personally need to calculate, but this is how it's calculated. And your priest, if the priest has questions, there are really good resources on CPG's website. They can call the diocesan office. But here's an overview so you have an understanding of what this looks like. So in determining the amount of the housing allowance, it's a 3-pronged test, and it is the lower of these 3 amounts. It's the lower of the amount they actually spend on housing, or the amount that was designated as housing allowance, or the fair market rental value of the house furnished with utilities. So the person may be living in a house where the house payment is $1,000 a month. I know that's ridiculous even in LA and San Francisco, but just say it's $1,000 a month. If the fair market value of that house rented with utilities and furnished is only $500 a month, then it doesn't matter that the cleric is paying $1,000 a month. It's the lower of these amounts. So they would only be able to use $500 a month as a housing allowance. So just keep in mind that there's a 3-pronged test for this. Some of the things that qualify would be real estate taxes, insurance, remodeling. Now, you can't do a kitchen remodel probably and meet that criteria of the lower of the fair market rental value, because the cost of the kitchen remodel is going to exceed that over the year. Things that don't qualify would be like regular cleaning service, groceries, reimbursable expenses, et cetera. So just something to keep in mind. The housing resolution is made typically when the cleric is hired, and then it needs to be done annually. So mark your calendars, because this is something that you'll need to keep in mind, that in November or December, you need to have this resolution for the following year. And this is important because it cannot be retroactive. It can only be prospective, all right? So you can make a mid-year adjustment, but it's only going forward. And if you forget and you don't do your housing allowance until March, then housing allowance cannot be used for January and February. So this is super important. There is some safety net language, and that safety net language that you can put at the bottom of the resolution would include verbiage saying that it's for this and all future years, unless otherwise provided. This does not relieve you of the responsibility of doing this annually. What happens is, say like you were going to do it in December, but for some reason the December vestry meeting got canceled and you made the resolution in January, that this verbiage should protect you for that month of January. But keep in mind, this is an annual resolution. We're going to go over housing allowances in more detail at another webinar. So, and we'll do that toward the end of the year when you're thinking about doing housing resolutions, and that might be something that your clerks would want to join in on the webinar. For now, a couple of resources. Please download the Manual of Business Methods. It's available in English and Spanish. The link is on this slide, and it's been given throughout the presentation. It will be part of the information available online, both on DioCal and EDLA's websites. Other resources, you can contact your diocesan office. If you are in DioCal, you can contact me at michelleR@diocal.org. And if you're in EDLA, finance at, ladiocese.org. And if you're in another diocese, then contact your diocesan office. I have so enjoyed this webinar, and I've considered a privilege to have shared this information with you. Please put in the chat any questions you have. Please put in the chat ideas for webinars that would be helpful for you in the future, and we will certainly take those under consideration.
All right, so we do have a couple more questions here.
Okay.
Do local parishes prepare a multi-year financial plan?
Well, certainly that is a best practice. You'll want to know, ideally you would want to have a 5-year plan going forward. That would be ideal. Many parishes don't have the resources to do that. And so if you can at least do 1 year going forward, that's optimal. If you are not quite able to do that, now's the time to start thinking and preparing and drafting your budget for 2022.
Okay. We have an employee who is ordained in another non-Episcopal church. She is the youth director. Currently, we approve a housing allowance for her. Is that okay?
Did you say she was ordained?
In another non-Episcopal church, but yes, she's ordained.
Yeah, so in order to qualify for the housing allowance, you have to be ordained. So it doesn't matter which church it is. And if you are the employer, then you would be the body responsible for passing that housing resolution in your vestry or bishop's committee.
Okay. When you recruit for a new rector, how do you present the total compensation package for a winning candidate?
Sure. So your vocations office is going to be your go-to resource for this. But basically, you present a cash compensation package. It would be up to the priest to designate which part of that package would be cut out as a housing allowance.
Okay. Is there a calendar of duties for a parish treasurer that the diocese has as a best practice, thinking of things like the parochial report, housing allowance, etc.?
Um, the those dates are certainly available on both websites. I don't know if there is one page that lists all of the dates on them, but you've got important dates, and let me think about trying to get that up on a website
Okay.
if it's not there already.
Is it appropriate for the treasurer to be involved in the stewardship/pledging campaigns?
Oh, absolutely. You want to use your treasure. The treasure is key in a lot of this. So absolutely.
Okay. If there's a rectory, is a housing allowance needed/allowed?
If there's a rectory, the housing allowance is going to be for amounts that are spent over and above the amount that's the amount that over and above what the church is providing. So, for example, if the church does not pay utilities on a rectory, the cleric will designate the utilities as housing allowance. Okay. And we're going to go over this in detail at the housing allowance webinar, but that in a nutshell is the answer.
Okay. Thank you, Reverend Michelle. This first segment was very informative.
Thank you for
Uh,
having me.
yeah, can you provide a PowerPoint version of these slides? Yes, I'll also post the PowerPoint version as well as a PDF version of this slide deck, and that'll be on diocesanconvention.com.
And we'll get it up on DialCals as well.
Cool. Thank you so much. Very helpful. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. When you say best practice, does that mean canonically required?
Yeah, the canons aren't going to go through every single internal control or best practice. So the best practice is something that is an established practice and something that you learn in webinars.
Okay. Wow, for some reason I thought this was 9 to 12 p.m., but let me say this is the best diocesan seminar I have ever attended at any diocese. So well done,
Woo-hoo.
not only in content, but in
Thank you.
presentation, with having Samantha facilitating. Just wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks,
So
Samantha. You're
good to have
awesome.
you. Oh, thank you. Do parishes generally pay the clergy for the employer's SECA amount?
Well, that part is part of the cash compensation package. In EDLA, it is separately identified, but it's still part of this whole package. I hope that makes sense, but you're getting like a $65,000, and that's going to include housing, cash, and SECA, for example.
Okay. Do treasurers have to be certified by EDLA or anyone else?
No, it's designated at the parish level or vicar, the mission level.
Okay. And that's the last question I have. Last chance if you want to ask a question now. Otherwise, I'm going to post these email addresses in the chat again. If you have additional questions, contact your diocesan finance office. Where do you find bonding? You said that was part of insurance, right?
Yeah. So when the church insurance, your church insurance companies know about this. So you'll just need to make sure it's included, but it's going to be included.
Okay, thank you. This has been really informative. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining. Thank you so much, Reverend Michelle, and thanks to everyone who joined us this morning. As a reminder, the recording of today's session is posted, or it will be posted on the EDLA Facebook page and YouTube channel. The resources will be available on the EDLA convention website. Again, that's diocesanconvention.com. Part 2 of this training will be Saturday, April 10th at 9 a.m. The link to register will also be available on the EDLA convention website. In the meantime, if you have additional questions, write to your diocesan finance office. I posted those email addresses in the chat. I also want to take this opportunity to invite everyone to join us for a special presentation on the safety and efficacy of the COVID vaccines with Dr. Nina Harawa of Holy Faith Church in Inglewood, epidemiologist and professor in residence at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. That will be Saturday, March 27th at 9 a.m. And the link to register and more information on that is also available at diocesanconvention.com. And that's everything. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this morning. It's been a pleasure to have you, and look forward to doing this soon again. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.